Rule number one, don't open the door.
I need a little more up top and a little less down below.
Amber alert. Oh God, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. In orbit of Uranus.
It smells.
I don't even want to talk about it.
Oh no, you love me. You know you love me.
Just don't let it touch the
You know, that's great, but give me a little more.
Why are you shooting at me?
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
Hello, and welcome out there in YouTube, podcast, all the other lands that are the lands around us. We are so glad that you have found Johnny Has the Keys, a podcast and YouTube channel where two guys get together, old friends. We talk about horror movies, science fiction movies, literature, key influences on the particular film of the week, and things that then that film influenced and key references that came from it. We've been doing this for a while now, and this is an exciting episode for us.
It's a first.
It is. It is our first ever Redux. I'm David, and this is my good co-conspirator, partner, friend, longtime associate, Tim, and we are. This is interesting. So Tim, give us the reason why are we doing this? If people look at our list, our oeuvre or whatever, we already have done this particular film. Why again?
Why again? Well, there's several reasons. The first and foremost for us would be that this was recorded 4 years ago before we were doing video for YouTube. So I have it on YouTube as an episode, but it really has a still picture and no one is seeing us talk actually. So that's a personal reason. I wanted to take. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I remember how difficult that was. I mean, because it took you a while to get me to agree to video.
A very long time.
Yeah. I did not want to see myself on the interwebs, talking.
No, I want to say E.T. might have been our first visual. It was in the first 5 of the 3rd season. So our first and second season are all totally no video.
They're podcasts, Tim. Podcasts don't have video.
Well, they can be both.
As you eventually coerced me into believing.
Right. So I felt like we needed to first of all, we did several classic horror and science fiction movies that season. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to go back and revisit for this season and maybe do more in the future? Because they are classic ones that we did without video. And this would give people that only watch video a chance to see us talk about them as well.
True.
Another reason, and this would probably be the second big reason, is because this week, the official sequel, actually there was a sequel years ago, but this is a reboot / sequel of the original is coming out, and Ellen Burstyn stars in it. She played Chris MacNeil in The Exorcist in 1973, and she is playing Chris MacNeil again in The Exorcist 2023.
And I am cautiously pessimistic about it. I am. Those of you who know me know I'm not a big remake guy anyway, even though I have been surprised with reboots. Battlestar Galactica, Westworld. Both of those were based on other source material that was reinvented and done in incredibly good ways. So maybe this will be a sequel that'll work. I'm sure we'll talk about it once we dive into the episode, but I remember Exorcist 2 being terrible. I remember Exorcist 3 not being too bad, but that was mostly because of George C. Scott and Brad Dourif. And what's his name?
Blatty directed it.
Yeah. And so it wasn't bad. As a sequel, it was great. So this is not, or was a good sequel to the original. So this one coming out this week or this month is not a It's not the only sequel to The Exorcist, of course. Right?
Oh,
I mean, you said first official sequel, but it's not really.
Well,
the first
no,
official.
that's hard to say. There was an official sequel back in the 70s with Linda Blair called The Heretic.
Yeah.
And it's a snooze. I can't remember watching it ever more than once. Can you?
Wait, I thought The Heretic was the third one.
No, The Heretic was the second one, and then Exorcist 3, directed by William Peter Blatty, was the third one. And I think Jason Miller may have come back for that one. I can't remember.
He did.
And it had George C. Scott and Brad Dourif in it.
Yeah, it's him and Brad Dourif back and forth that make it so cool, that whole prison scene.
Right.
So,
and from what I remember, that one's good, but The Heretic is a snooze. And it was directed by John Boorman, who was offered a chance to direct the original, but he directed the sequel because he thought the original was, I don't know, something about children. I can't remember. Anyway, so we had those three, and then there was I'm not recalling other movies, but I know there's been a television series that ran a couple of seasons. I mean, there's been a million knockoffs, obviously.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
I can't tell you. I mean, how many movies have the word exorcism in them? It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
But the reason this is getting high, this is getting attention is because it's that Gordon Green guy. It's a 3-name guy, but Gordon Green did the Halloween reboot with Jamie Lee Curtis. And now he's doing the Exorcist reboot with Ellen Burstyn. So it's kind of similar what he's attempting here, because they're predicting they're going to be 3 movies as well.
But you yourself, a huge Halloween fan, have told me that the first reboot was good, but the other 2 weren't.
Absolutely. I stand by that.
Okay. So he's not got a good track record, and he's doing probably one of the greatest horror movies of all time.
Well, I mean, Halloween's one of the greatest horror movies of all time.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Yeah. Although this one has so much more personal impact to me, so that I tend to elevate this one. And I think this one is more art than Halloween is. Not that Halloween's a bad movie at all.
Funny that you should mention that, because I was going to pontificate a little bit about that.
Please do.
I think that one of the reasons The Exorcist was such a cultural phenomenon falls into the fact that it's the first time, not the first time, but near the first time mainstream movies took horror seriously.
Yeah.
And the only other example I can think of before this is Rosemary's Baby,
which was just a couple of years before this.
Right. So this was, horror, has rarely been seen seriously in the community, in the film community. It was never, ever taken, seriously at the Oscars. And even though this one was nominated for some, they never gave an Academy Award to a horror movie until Silence of the Lambs in 1991. So...
But I mean, I'm sure you'll get to it and cover it, but this did have a lot of nominations.
Mm-hmm. It did,
and it was recognized by the Academy as being a
superior achievement.
Yes. Yes. And I also think, we can get to it once we get into production and history, but I think it was a huge cultural phenomenon. This was the first movie I remember really where people were in line to see it. I remember The Godfather was the same way. People were in line to see The Godfather. When I was a kid, I remember that. But there was huge press on The Exorcist. Lines and, all of the cultural stuff that went into it, of people fainting and throwing up. And
there's actually a small documentary on YouTube. It's about 20 or 30 minutes long, and it is just on the theaters and the lines and that stuff.
It's really good. Like interviewing like the ushers, like the ushers and the concession people and all that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, God almighty, that was before there was such thing as a multiplex.
Oh yeah. You had one theater.
there's like one theater that may be showing two films. They may have two auditoriums or whatever, or it's usually just a single, and they're lined around the block to get in that movie. It's camping out like a rock concert.
Oh yeah, yeah, and people are coming out going, okay, the 8:00 movie is sold out. If you want tickets for the 10, they'll go on sale in 5 minutes. So if you want to stick around for the 10:00 show,
or tomorrow, like the next show is tomorrow, but tickets go on sale in an hour or whatever. Yeah, it's crazy.
And I liked that documentary just because of the interview of people, saying, I've tried to see the movie 3 times and I've not made it through it yet. They've left the building or fainted or ran screaming outside or
they're like got a chip on their shoulder. I want to see if it'll make me throw up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. All of the quotes and especially in that 70s. But anyway, we'll get there. Let's go back to 73, shall we?
1973. God, that was a long time ago. I was 8 years old.
Yeah. I was older than that. I was older than that. I was 12 years old in 73. When's the first time? Let's do our normal. So this is a redux. We have done this before, but we are treating it like a normal episode for us and for the people who listen to us and everything. So our usual formula is we do what's happening in your genre week, but we're not going to do that because we're excited about this movie. We're going to dive in and make it different.
Well, and we anticipate this will run long.
When was the first time you saw this movie?
I obviously could not go to a theater and see it at 8 years old. So I had to wait until, and of course I didn't even probably know much about it. I probably saw the book. I imagine my sister read it or something. But the first time I saw it was on television because it was on television. I want to say before videotapes were in vogue. So
late 70s, early 80s.
Late 70s, early 80s, and it was obviously edited for television. They cut a good bit.
Yeah. It was still scary. You saw The Exorcist Jr., the Disney version.
Well, I want to say the head still spun around, but the masturbation scene, or what I call the stabbing scene, was not. And I mean, but all the stuff that make this movie scary to me was left in. All the shots of the door, the fact that, it's cold enough they see their breath, the cracks in the walls, the thumps in the night, that kind of stuff was all still in there. So it was still scary.
One of the reasons I'm excited about doing this Redux, and I was excited the first time we did it, was because this movie has a lot of personal effect on me. Which from me, talking about it for decades, but because if people ask me anytime, what's the scariest movie you've ever seen? It's always The Exorcist. It's always this movie. And people look at me like, well, I just watched that last week. It wasn't scary at all. It doesn't even get scary to the last half hour or whatever sort of thing. This movie just affected me and has continued to affect me a great deal. And maybe I am part of that cultural phenomenon that happened that time frame, because this was before the satanic panic in the 80s and all that, but around the same time it was heavily either denounced or supported by religious people. And I came from a very religious house, even though I wasn't Catholic. I was raised Southern Baptist, but still, my father worked for Billy Graham. It was a very religious sort of upbringing. And this was like, that's that movie about demon. It's about a demon. Anyway, the reason that it was so impactful to me, and the reason I say that is because it was 1979. I remember because I was a senior, and it was re-released. And they had, a modest campaign to re-release it and everything else. And it came to the Volunteer Twin Cinema. Ooh, here in the hometown.
Were there lines?
There was no line. I went. It was
them Tennessee people aren't going for that. It's evil.
Oh no! Oh Lord Jesus! Oh Lord Jesus, help me. So I went to the last showing of the night. So it was like a 10:00 showing or something like that.
Nice.
I remember it was also like a weekday because it was the only time I could get to see it. So it was like a Thursday or something like that. Anyway, But I remember going in, buying my ticket. I got my popcorn, got my, soda, everything else. Went in, sat down, watching the ads and everything. And then they start the little trailers and the lights are going down. And I'm looking around and there's nobody else in this freaking theater. I mean, I'm sitting like, halfway back where I like in the center, yada, yada. And I'm going, it's like a private screening room. I was the only one. So I watched The Exorcist alone in the dark in this theater, and it terrified me. It really, I still get chills to say it was scary. It was freaking scary.
That's funny. I missed the fact that you said you saw it in 79, and I said, were there any lines? But that was like a re-release.
Oh yeah. It. Yeah, this was a re-release, like I said.
Okay.
Because in 73, even though I was older, I was almost a teenager, but I was not allowed to watch it.
Yeah, well, you would have only been 12, and you can't really get into our movies at that age.
Right.
I wonder if it had lines in Morristown in 1973.
I don't even know if it was released in Morristown.
It might not have been. They might have said, no way, Jose. Yeah.
Hell, we're not doing the devil movie. You show that in Knoxville or Nashville, one of them other evil places.
That's hilarious. Yeah, you may be right.
Because I had, by 79, I had read the book. Because I remember having the original like paperback, the one with like the purple cover. It wasn't
and the blurry picture of the girl's face. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was that one. It wasn't the one that they have now or the movie image or anything else.
I like the one they have now, but the one that you're talking about is iconic, and I can remember seeing it, lying probably around my house. I'm sure my sister probably read it. Yeah. I don't think my mother would have read it. I think it would have freaked her out.
Well, so my personal attraction is saw it alone and it scared the hell out of me. I was so impressed with the makeup that I went and found Dick Smith's makeup kits. He was selling makeup kits, and I still have pieces of that makeup kit. I still have the trays of molds from his makeup kit of the scars and burn scars and cuts and stuff that you used to make out of like this gelatin kind of latex foam. And now you can make them out of, silicone and everything else, but the molds still work and they're still great. I bought that in like 79, 78, somewhere in there. And it gave me this huge interest in makeup and as makeup effects and special makeup. And we'll get into that with details with all the stuff he did. But I also I auditioned for drum major to Tubular Bells. But before I even seen the movie, I auditioned with that song. And, that's probably something you don't see. I auditioned to the Exorcist music.
You're obsessed.
Yeah. Yeah. So much so that in like mid 80s or whenever, I finally took a trip to DC, Washington, DC.
Oh, yeah.
I'd never been. And
you went to Georgetown.
Instead of going to the Lincoln Memorial or anything, I went to the steps in Georgetown.
That's great.
First place I went. It was great too. And it was exactly the way it's shown in the pictures. It is terrifying. That is way too scary.
used to have, my doctor was over there. I used to go to a doctor.
Oh, really?
There. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Georgetown on M Street. Yeah, for sure.
That's crazy. So yeah, definitely a personal investment into this movie. I love this movie. Did you like it the first time you saw it on television?
Oh, absolutely. I was like, it was scary. It was very scary to me. But I'm trying to think. And then I mean, if you continue as we do through various versions, I mean, all of a sudden, it comes out on videotape and you get to see the uncut version. Then, Freakin decides in the early 2000s to go back and please Blatty, who was always bitchy about him not having certain scenes in it. And he restored like a version for Peter Blatty, which is the version you've never seen, I think is what it's called. And I saw that version that's got the spider walk in it that no one had seen in the original 1970s version.
Well, it also sets up the third movie a lot better because it has more with the detective and Dyer, the other priest,
which makes more
they
sense.
They actually have a friendship in it,
right? And it's before we talk about this, I'll mention that I also recently reread the book, but what I was going to say is, so they did the movie. The movie kept evolving into different versions, and the book has too, because Blatty about 20 years ago or less went back and re-edited the book and changed a few things and punched it up a bit and then re-released it, which is, I think, the audio version that I listened to the other day. Cause I like I said, I reread it for this podcast.
Okay.
And,
well, and another, one thing we
yeah.
missed in the opening is another reason for doing this is the 50th anniversary of this film.
Oh yeah, that's another reason. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was released the day after Christmas, 1970.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
Merry Christmas, hail Satan.
Cannot believe that was it Warner Brothers? Yeah,
I think
that did it.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that they would have picked that particular date. So, but anyway,
well, had your fill of Jesus, now have some devil on December 26th.
Right.
Also
which
David
means
Farmer's
all
birthday.
of these lines and people waiting to see it and everything else went through the winter, because it stayed in theaters for months.
That's true.
It's not like now where, if you don't make your money back in the first weekend, we're just, pulling the movie.
Yeah. And in all honesty, those lines probably didn't develop until January when word of mouth started getting out.
Right.
And that would be the coldest time. So
yeah.
People were standing
so all
in
of these
lines
Chicago, Philadelphia, whatever, these people are freezing to death up there Boston. In line for hours.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. Production, want to go into that?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. We should talk a little bit before. This is actually directed by William Friedkin.
Yes.
Friedkin, we know, but right before this did The French Connection, which is a big movie with Gene Hackman. He had also done The Boys in the Band, which is an adaptation of an off-Broadway play. But he really was known more for being a documentary filmmaker. Yes.
He started as a documentarian.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is one of the reasons why William Peter Blatty was recruiting him. Because I found this all weird, man. Blatty's got this like Hollywood, I don't know. It's like he might have wanted to be in films or be an actor or a director, because really The Exorcist is his cash cow. He has basically milked it for all it's worth and not really done that much else as far as writing in his lifetime, unless it was another Exorcist type book. He did do The Ninth Configuration. I do remember that. But anyway, he was actively recruiting William Friedkin to direct this movie. I was like, how would he have that knowledge? But he did, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also came across the thing in one of the documentaries, because I watched several for this podcast. And one of the reasons why he convinced Warner Brothers to go with Friedkin over Borman and other people was the fact that he kept stressing, this has to be real. This has to feel like a real family with real relationships and real people. And it started me thinking, so many of the remakes and the reboots and the exorcism of, Julie Rose or whatever, and the Pope's Exorcist and yada, yada. Mm-hmm. All of them are about special people in special situations. And that's why I think this movie is scarier, because this movie feels like you're watching a documentary. You're just watching a medical history. You're watching the medical channel, kind of thing, almost for the first hour, because she literally is given
that's some of the scariest stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, and it's all treated so realistically, as opposed to, a cabin way in the woods all by itself, isolated with, yada, yada. You know what I mean? There's more realism. And I think Friedkin is the one that brings that to it. He brings that realism. Well,
and it's the Stephen King way of writing, putting real people into extraordinary situations. Mm-hmm. And that's, the only thing a little unusual is the fact that she's a big actress. I guess, so that does lift her a little apart from the average Joe. But it's just basically they build that relationship early on in the film between her and Regan as mother and daughter. And you just see them as a family that's all of a sudden just totally upturned.
And that's the thing. Even if you're not into horror movies, even if you're not into supernatural, even if you're not into, Catholicism or whatever, this is about a mother whose daughter is sick and she can't figure out why, and no one will help her.
Yeah.
And so she is desperate. And I think that's a lot of emotional catharsis for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? You just gave me an idea that I hadn't thought of in all the research of this. This came out in 1973. When did Carrie come out?
I think in 1974, because the movie came out in 1976. Actually, you know what? No, I think the book and the movie came out in 1976. So interesting that you should say that. I have it pulled up because we were talking about Stephen King before we started recording. It came out in 1974. I was right. So it came out the year after this came out. So
I posit a theory that I just developed. Part of the cultural phenomena, I think, is because society was pre-Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
Society hadn't, they had the Richard Mathesons and the H.P. Lovecrafts, Edgar Allan Poe, that sort of thing, but they had not had King yet. And King brought horror to everybody's front door, their bedroom, their desk, their bathroom, everywhere. Psycho had an effect on people just because of the shower scene. But I don't, and we had the exploitation movies of the late 60s and early 70s. But nothing, I think, got into the consciousness like this because it was pre-King. It was, like you said, he was good at making horror real.
Well, and there were a few other examples, like you mentioned Matheson, and I would go as far as to mention Romero, as far as like The Last Man on Earth and Night of the Living Dead. However, those were all low budget, secondary, like pulp writers.
Yep.
This was mainstream, as I mentioned earlier, as was King. King didn't intend to be mainstream, but his first novel just shot him into the stratosphere.
Yep.
And from then on, he was a household name.
Like you said earlier, horror at this time was, a drive-in.
It was B movies.
Yeah, B movies. Horror was not an Oscar winner ever. Sort of thing. Yeah.
No, only, like I said, Rosemary's Baby is the only other thing I can think of before this film. And it's just slightly before that would be considered higher level than a B movie. And it was produced by Roger Corman.
Yeah.
Which is funny. Ironic.
So you had, from what my research that I looked into, Blatty wrote the novel because of a story he heard when he was in college.
Correct.
In Georgetown or near there. He was in DC. I'm pretty sure.
It was either DC or Maryland. Yeah. It was really close.
The story was from Maryland because that's where, and it was a boy and an exorcism, and he researched it. And then when he decided he wanted to write the novel, he actually conferred with a priest for like a year writing the novel. And the novel
he went to Georgetown, and he knew some Jesuit priests that were in the area. Maybe he was going to church there. I don't know. But yeah, he did. He did get advice from them.
And the novel was popular. It was a very successful novel, from the research that I gathered.
I have a trivia on that I think is interesting. Did you know it took him a year to write it, and that he rented a cottage that was actually the guest house of Angela Lansbury?
No, I didn't know that. That's great.
I thought that. Yeah. So this book was written in Angela Lansbury's guest house.
That should be under the title.
I watched a documentary where he went back and visited it and walked through it, and he was like blown away. He was like, "Oh my God, I remember all of this." He was walking from room to room because he lived there for a year.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Novel comes out. Warner Brothers wants it, of course, to make a movie. I saw a quote, and I can't remember who it was, but I don't think it was Blatty, but it may have been. If it wasn't Blatty, it was on the studio heads. And they said, we don't want another Rosemary's Baby. We want a really scary movie. And I thought, well, that's interesting because Rosemary was scary, but Rosemary was
It was
more
humorous
mood.
too, though.
Yeah.
It had humor and levity as well as horror. This does not have humor and levity really at all.
No.
Not much.
Unless you're just nervous laughter because you're so scared.
Or it's like the Kinderman talking to the priest about movies or something. Yeah, there's very little levity in this movie at all.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to say that I think something parallel was going on. I think he had written the script or written the book, the manuscript, and that it was going to be purchased or it was in the process of being, it takes a while before you can get a book published. And even though the publishers were shopping it to studios, I think Blatty then was, taking that manuscript and giving it to Friedkin and trying to recruit Friedkin, because I have in my notes that Alfred Hitchcock turned down a chance to acquire the screen rights. And then when some other producer brought the rights, he turned it down from them as well. I also read that Stanley Kubrick was attached to direct this film, but only if he could produce it. And the studio was worried he would go over budget. And they settled on Mark Rydell. But William Peter Blatty insisted on Friedkin. And it was a standoff. And Blatty finally won and got Friedkin the gig. So a lot of directors, and we mentioned John Borman. John Borman was offered the chance to direct, but he declined because he felt it was cruel towards children. I knew it had something to do with children. But he went on to direct the sequel, The Heretic.
And I read that production was plagued because he did not like the original movie. And
it doesn't look anything like the original movie.
You had a guy who didn't like the original and he's trying to do a sequel to it. Well, he's obviously not going to do it justice or well. I also read that Friedkin read the book every day for like 3 months, and he would highlight lines or underline scenes, and then he would send that to Blatty saying, "This needs to be in your screenplay."
Yeah.
And a quote that he said when Blatty gave him the first screenplay draft, he said, "It's a good start." Because he said it wasn't a good movie script when he first read it. He loved the book, but he said the script needed work.
I mean, you can tell that they both love the source material. Obviously, Blatty did because he wrote it, but William Friedkin did too. And like you said, he was taking chunks out of it that he felt were essential to the film. And that's why I think this is one of the best adaptations I think I've ever seen, because I, recently read the book and rewatched it. And I'm like, wow, this is really close to the novel.
Good.
The only thing different is the novel is a parallel story, really. It's a murder mystery and it's a horror novel. And there's a lot more of Kinderman trying to solve the murder mystery in the novel. And there's a lot less of it in the movie because they push the horror up front. So that's my distinct my distinct difference in noticing that. I mean, recently, having read it.
That makes sense because several of the documentaries talk about the fact that Friedkin wanted certain things. He wanted to follow what's the mom's name? Regan's the daughter. Chris
McNeil.
Wanted to follow Chris's descent into desperation. The fact that no matter who she goes to, nobody helps her. So she's forced to actually seek out something that to her is a witch doctor. It's the same as a freaking witch doctor. And she said, he's my last hope.
Well, she's an atheist. It's pretty plain to see.
Well, yeah. But, and Friedkin is an established agnostic. He says he's an agnostic, even doing it. But he wanted that. And so he wanted that whole beginning of that whole first, huge chunk of the movie to the horror to be more of a dread feel and not a scare, not a jump, not so that when it finally manifested itself, it would be so shocking. And you're already halfway through the movie, you're like, I can't stop now. Oh my gosh, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you can see that. You can see that in you can see why he pulled back from the rationale of the murder mystery. that distracts from Chris and Regan. But other than pointing the finger at Regan, which he does in the movie.
Well, and it's pretty obvious that she did kill Burke. But they never really say that.
But not as herself.
Conclude. Yeah. No, not as herself. And I am assuming now that we're here, because I don't want to forget it, but this little segue, I'm assuming she's responsible for the vandalism as well, because they never indicate who is. So is she leaving her window at night as Pazuzu?
Well, or the demon was in someone else for the vandalism and then found Regan.
Yeah, could be. But she definitely pushed Burke out that window very similarly to the way the priest jumps out of it at the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's more or less stated throughout the movie, so to speak.
For sure.
I think Friedkin has such a great visual eye in this movie all the way through it. Even little stuff, we've talked about it before, but little things like even the Iraq scene, the fact that there's very little supportive dialogue for anything in that. We're just supposed to take whatever out of it. There is no, and this is the demon that he fought earlier in Africa. That's none of that is explained.
It's not necessary.
Done. Right. The carriage with the lady, the real scary pale face lady in the carriage that almost runs him down in the streets of Iraq. And there's no reason for it. There's no explanation for it. You don't come back to it or talk about it. It's those moments that are just really great and so well shot and so well seen. Yeah.
Sorry. You just reminded me of something I want to jot down.
Yeah.
As a key. I'll remember it when I come back. I mentioned Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick and John Borman, but there were a few other directors that are associated with this before Friedkin came on. And they are Arthur Penn, who was teaching at Yale.
Good choice.
He was approached. I guess he turned it down. Peter Bogdanovich, who I always associate with William Friedkin. To me, he's like William Friedkin in black and white. I mean, they're both 70s directors, and they just remind me of each other. But Bogdanovich, who wanted to pursue other projects, subsequently regretted turning it down. So he obviously turned it down as well. And then this one's the funniest. Mike Nichols wanted to shoot it as a he did not want to shoot it because it was so dependent on a child being the lead. That's the main reason he turned it down.
Right.
I mean, everyone has their reasons, but you also can imagine what their regrets are.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, the studio hired Mark Rydell, but Blatty fought them and got Friedkin in there. So there was like 6 or 7 other directors in line to do this because Friedkin had done The French Connection, but I don't think it had been released yet. Had it?
I'm pretty sure it had. Yeah.
Maybe it had because it had won Oscars or was nominated. And that gave him some clout. So anyway,
a lot.
He was Friedkin got the job. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. French Connection came out in 71.
Oh, it did. Okay. I thought it came out this year. I thought it was filmed in 71 and came out in 73, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, it came out in 71.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes more sense then. Okay. What else do I have? Background wise, upon its theatrical release, the film affected so many audiences so strongly at that many theaters. Paramedics were called to treat people for fainting and hysterics.
Yep.
And I can only attribute that if it's real, because I'm not sure how much people were faking it, but I can only attribute it as to the fact that we had just never seen anything like this before. Nothing this shocking had ever really been out there.
I also think it was the time when journalism was really taking over. Television was everywhere. News was everywhere. This was post-Watergate. So there's a lot of the news is saving us. The news will tell us the truth kind of thing. The news, the journalists broke the Watergate story and
This
all
is
that.
Walter Cronkite.
Right. And so there was a lot of, and they hyped it. They hyped the crap out of it. They were interviewing priests. They were interviewing ministers. They were, everything. So I think there was a lot of hype for it. It ended up becoming the highest grossing R-rated movie ever.
I read that, and adjusted for inflation, it still is, I think.
Still is. Highest R-rated movie ever. So huge windfall in residuals. People waited, like we said, waited in line forever. There are people that still talk about psychological scars from it. I mean, I guess I'm one. I still remember that every time it would cut to that door and he would do that slow zoom in on it, I would just tense up, and I still think about it and go like, ooh, no, something bad's going to happen.
Did you catch either of those documentaries? Did you catch the Raising Hell one in particular?
Yes. Yeah.
Did you see how they filmed that scene of them going upstairs and how they had the cameraman in a swing on a chain so that they could get a Steadicam shot going up around almost like a spiral staircase?
This was before Steadicams, and
I was blown away by it.
And it was a brilliant shot. It was really a really well done, cool. Shows the way Friedkin wanted to do stuff. Which, I've got that in my notes.
It's the one where Sharon is in the lead, I believe, and she's leading some maybe Jason Miller up the steps. Or something.
Up the
There's
steps.
Like 2 or 3 of them. Yeah.
Yep.
Because something happened and they're going fast.
Lines everywhere, huge hype, stayed in theaters for months. The British Film Commission refused to release it when it came out to video because they said it was too horrific for home
It's
viewing.
A video nasty.
Yeah, it was a video nasty. Billy Graham denounced it, said there was literally evil in the movie.
In the celluloid, the film itself.
The movie itself had evil inside it. And actually, I saw a thing that Ellen Burstyn said the same thing. Ellen Burstyn at one time was quoted as saying she thought the movie itself, had evil in it.
I saw an interview with her, and she really buys into the fact that it's a cursed film. She knows like all the deaths associated either directly or indirectly, because one of them was like a baby. Like that, like a cameraman's wife was pregnant and that baby died or something. I mean, so they weren't all directly related to the film, but so I could see why she would think that. She said 9.
Yep, there are 9. Okay. That's the curse mythology. Is there were 9 deaths associated, this, including a baby, including I think Max von Sydow's brother.
I think he did die. But I mean, that's just coincidence.
Well, he actually said it really well in one of the documentaries. He goes, okay, if you shoot a movie for 4 weeks, you are probably going to have some accidents. A movie is a huge thing. It has accidents. And you might have some timing accidents, meaning it's, someone will die. Someone related to someone on the cast or the crew, because they're usually huge cast, huge crew. Somebody's going to die in a month. He said, but if you shoot for a year, which is what we did, you're probably going to have a lot more deaths.
Right. And I totally agree with him. I was like, Ellen, get your wig back on. That's not, you're freaking out.
Okay. But do you want to go there? Do you want to go to the curse mentality?
It's part of the background. So that's fine.
So 9 people died in the course of the production of it, not after the release, but the production of it. Linda Blair suffered back injury because of the harness. Ellen Burstyn suffered back injury because of another harness.
They're both scene. That's both William Friedkin. I almost said Peter Bogdanovich. That's both William Friedkin's fault.
Both Friedkin's fault. And we'll get to that when we get into shooting. Fire destroyed the set. And even afterwards, they couldn't determine arson or any kind of reason for the fire. It was a spontaneous fire on the set, destroyed the set. Friedkin asked Father Dyer, the actor playing Father Dyer, who was an actual Jesuit priest and was actually a consultant on the film,
Right.
to please come and exorcise the set, which he refused to do because he said he couldn't do it. Jason Miller did a lot of work with the local Jesuits in Georgetown, a lot of research with them. And at one time, an elderly priest came up to him and handed him a St. Christopher medal and said he needed it for protection because the thing he was shooting was evil. The next week, Jason Miller saw the casket of that priest because he had died the week after. I got the two things. There were so all of that led to this mystique that again the media hyped up to go see this movie because it's a cursed film.
Yeah, I mean, whoever marketed it was a genius because they just thought, oh, we can use all of this.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course we'll use all of that.
I mean, you think the Blair Witch was a marketing bonanza? I mean, this was too.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a good comparison, actually.
Yeah,
that's very good.
It's in my case.
It's in your case. What else do you want to go into? Just actual
well, I just want. I mean,
set?
I will conclude that by saying I think it's a bunch of malarkey. I don't believe any of it.
Well, but you don't believe in curses in general.
Well, and I'm pretty much an atheist too. So
you're not a superstitious person.
Yeah, I'm not superstitious in that way. I can see where they could be construed as coincidental. I mean, I see them as coincidental, construed as mysterious, so to speak.
I also think there was compounding inaccuracies about it. There were people that thought this is a movie about a demon. There were people that thought this is a movie about the devil, not a demon, and then multiple devils, just because that's in general in exorcism stories, that's what ends up happening. Is this the real devil? Is this a servant of the devil? Is this a demon? Is this a multiple demons like Legion or something like that?
Well, that is a point in the book, is that she is trying to mislead him by saying she's the devil.
Right.
Pazuzu, so to speak.
And that goes to a point. There's a lot of deception because that is based on real fact of supposedly exorcisms in the past and demonology in general and all of that. Demons will try to lie, manipulate, make you believe other things that aren't true. And that scene, one of my favorite scenes is that first interview with Karis. And all of that is so good because it is the power of the demon to say what he is saying to Karis is really good.
Oh, when it's just like real casual and he goes in and sits down and has a conversation with her.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when that's what a lovely day for an exorcism, kind of thing. And then the whole conversation about your mother's in here with us, Karis. It's just really good. It's and he speaks, speaking, you have to speak in a foreign language,
right?
In order to be justified as possessed, and speaks in Latin, speaks in French, and then he talks back in Latin and she doesn't respond. She responds in French. It's really cool. The manipulation. It's a well-written scene. It's really good.
There's a lot more of that in the book too. He has a huge difficulty getting the evidence he needs to persuade the church to approve an exorcism. Yes, and in the movie, it happens very fast. I was like, okay, I guess we're going to skip all that.
Well, yeah, I think because he had to, because he exhausted all the medical.
And it was not necessary. And really, he probably exhausted the medical stuff too much. He probably could have cut some of that, but yeah.
And I think Blatty was trying to, justify it from a Catholic standpoint, because the Catholic Church doesn't sanction a lot of exorcism because it has to, it doesn't want to be hyped up the wrong way, sort of thing. And I've got in my notes that they describe this not as a horror movie, but as a quote theological thriller. So that kind of goes along with what you were saying about it's a part murder mystery thriller, part psychological horror sort of thing.
I would go as to categorize it as horror now, because if you say theological thriller, I think of like Dan Brown.
Okay. That's good point.
Yeah.
Great point.
This is much more horror than Dan Brown.
Yeah. And this is a smart horror movie. I've got it in my notes. This is a very intellectual approach to a horror movie, which I think worked too very well. It's got this intellectual approach way up here, and then it's extremely visceral and primitive and gets into your soul sort of thing.
Yeah, it's just like it leaves the celluloid and gets into your skin cells.
Oh yeah. There's not a lot of jump scares in it. It's very slowly paced. And I would chastise modern audiences who don't enjoy this. This is the screenplay. The screenplay, we've talked about it several times in the podcast. The screenplay is designed to let you breathe. It's not action after action after action, scare after scare after scare. There's moments of huge reflection where you can go, or go, oh no, it's coming back.
Or
and then
there's moments,
Oregon.
But there's also moments of horror that are very quiet. Like when she calls Karis up and says, you need to get over here. And they just go upstairs and look at her stomach and those words are there. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's nothing scary, like nothing jump scary about that at all. It's just really creepy.
Yes. Really creepy. That's the best way to put it. Yes. Good. So that's, it's a smorgasbord of horror too. There's jump scares, there's visual effects, there's gore, there's subtlety, there's dread.
Whereas in a lot of the Exorcist movies now that you're talking about, modern audiences, if they eschew this, they're crazy. But a lot of them are specifically mentioning, those things. That's what they like. Oh, her body bends backwards. Oh, it sounds like bones cracking. Oh, she climbed up into the corner of a room, that kind of stuff. And it's like, that's not what the reason this movie is successful is not that. As a matter of fact, the head spinning around to me is the worst thing in this movie. It's just stupid. I would rather have the actors convince you that this is really happening more so than having her spit green pea soup in his face or what have you.
Well, I would rather see her. I agree with the head spin. Yeah.
Yeah, the head spin's terrible, but I love it when the thing is flinging her on the bed. Like you said, that harness that hurt Linda Blair's back. I mean, that's just, it's just horrible. And it's in broad daylight, isn't it? I think. I can't remember. But and I was like,
both of the big horrific early scenes are in daylight. That scene and then the crucifixion scene, the crucifix scene, are both in the daytime.
Well, before we move on to scenes, that's a good segue because I was thinking we should probably do that. I did want to mention one other thing is we always talk about the writer, director, whatever, but in this, you definitely want to talk about the music a little bit. And I mean, I don't notice any music in this movie other than Tubular Bells. Do you?
There's not.
There's very little, if there is any.
And that was his point. Music would make you feel like you're watching a movie. I even saw a quote where he said that.
Okay.
He said, I wanted people to feel like they were really experiencing this from Chris's point of view.
But when he uses it, it's so smart.
Yeah. But Tubular Bells is only used like 3 times.
Right.
Very sporadically, However, sound design is used a lot in this movie and very well. In my opinion.
And they bumped that up in that version you haven't seen that I was telling you about. Freakin' went in and redid the sound because of
redid a lot of the audio,
advancement in that technology. Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that about the music. We can go on to scenes if you want. We mentioned those 2 daylight scenes. Are there other scenes that stick out to you? I mean, the entire movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I love watching her walk around Georgetown because I used to live near there. And it was cool watching what it looked like back then. I was looking at the light fixtures thinking, I wonder if they still have those big globes.
The standout scenes to me are, of course, the ending, the whole final exorcism scene, all the way from when the both of them enter through Karis and the last rites and all of that.
When she's sitting there looking all, I don't know. smug. I don't know what the word is.
Oh yeah. And his body is just laying over the bed. Yeah.
And she's like, see what I did? But she's not really saying anything.
No,
she's
but
so
the whole, and it's
looking.
all implied, and it's all implied of, you shouldn't have left. This is your fault. You left me alone with him, kind of thing. It's just so well done. That scene, of course, the crucifix masturbation scene was just, I remember reading it in the novel going, what the, I can't, what? And it just is just as painful and shocking in the movie.
See, to me, it's more shocking in the book because it leaves it more to your imagination. It's less violent and more sexual. And the whole thing of her putting her mother's face down there is much more prominent in the book. In the movie, to me, it just looks like she's stabbing herself with a crucifix.
Oh, yeah. And and I think that's the only way he could have gotten away with it.
Yeah, probably.
But it's also, I saw a little reference and went, oh my gosh, as many times as I've seen this movie, I didn't realize that this is the first time we see a physical manifestation of telekinesis. This is the first time things move other than Regan. So, because remember that she kept saying the bed moving was just vibrations. It wasn't, something lifting something up, but it moves that whole chest of drawers across, all the stuff flying, all that is in the scene.
Well, the first time is when she opens the door, isn't it? And things are flying in the air.
That's after this.
It's after this?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This
is after she goes to the psychiatrist. She sees him and she squeezes him, and she's had the whole, this is when she has the crucifix. That's the scene I always remember.
Okay.
I always remember the first interview. One of the, when people say, okay, give me a scary horror movie quote, it's always, what a lovely day for an exorcism. That is just, it's terrified me. And she's strapped into the bed, and she's just smiling and looking at him and everything. And that whole interview, I love that entire scene with Karis interviewing her and talking to her and the way she talks to him.
One of my favorite scenes is when the straps break and she levitates up
and does the whole reach up.
No. The one where she just floats up unconscious with the white sclerotic contact lenses.
Oh, you have a picture of it.
There's a picture of it behind me right now. Yeah. I love that because I was like, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it's very quiet. She just rises up and I'm like, holy shit.
And that's when they do the holy water and it cuts her. It actually burns into her legs.
Right. It's like they're using that to try to get her down, I guess. Without
the power of Christ compels you. Power of Christ compels you. One of the ones that gets me still is that whatever it was called, arterioplasty or whatever, the squirting out her neck.
It's like I think they're putting a camera or something down in her vein. It looks like they're getting it open wide enough to stick another tube down in there, is what it looks like a catheter.
Catheter up into her brain.
Right.
The reason. But oh my gosh, it is. And I read that Friedkin was such a documentarian that those are real doctors in those scenes, and that this was actually used at, I think, Yale or Stanford or somewhere as a medical procedure technique training film for like years after The Exorcist.
Well, one of them was actually a serial killer. We talked about this on our first show of this.
One of the doctors in the scenes. Right?
I think I have it in my notes. I want to say it may have been the technician with the CAT scan. I cannot remember, but one of them actually ended up being a serial killer and killing somebody. Yes.
Wow.
So I'm not sure if they were a doctor, but they were definitely a technician of some sort.
Yeah, I have it. The scene with the angiography is used as a training film for radiologists for years after the film.
That is crazy.
Yeah. And that's another thing we should recommend from the very beginning is, or should have mentioned from the very beginning. This was pre-computers, guys. This was pre-CGI, all of that. All of the effects in this movie are practical.
Right. And if we mention music, we should also mention Dick Smith and Rick Baker, who worked as the makeup artist on this film. I mean, the effects and the makeup of this film are amazing for the time, and they're still good in some places. A lot of people don't realize it, but Max von Sydow was young, and they made him look like an old priest.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And that's just part of it.
Which goes to one of my passions, which is Dick Smith, who's now called the grandfather of, makeup effects. He was the key influencer of people like Rick Baker, Rob Bottin, Tom Savini, V. Neal.
I think Dick Smith would disagree with you.
You think Dick Smith would?
Yeah, I think Dick Smith would say no, Jack Pierce is, or he would go back, or Lon Chaney was, or whatever, because they all respect makeup as it has grown throughout the film industry. Agreed,
but he recognizes both of those as his key influences.
Yeah,
Lon Chaney and Pierce for him. Do you know? I read in trivia with him, he got started in makeup because of a theater makeup book he saw, and it showed how to do contours with white and black and makeup to create visual effects on stage, and that just intrigued him so much, and that's how he got started in makeup.
Yeah.
He is one of the least awarded makeup artists in history.
Dick Smith is?
Yeah,
because Rick Baker is probably one of the most awarded, and he's his protege.
The two that are tied, I think, are Greg Canham and Rick Baker.
Rick Baker.
I think Canham has 12, and I think Baker has 11 Academy Awards. Dick Smith has 1. He won a Lifetime Achievement Award. No, he has 2 because he won for Little Big Man.
I remember Little Big Man. Was it because were they not doing makeup awards as prominently, or was it just less? Okay.
Correct. They had no makeup award. You had to do special effects. You had to win special effects to win the makeup award.
Gotcha.
Which is part of it. And in my research, I found something I had to share with Tim. A couple of weeks ago, we were doing Stepford Wives.
Yes.
And we mentioned the last scene with her, and she's in the negligee and everything else. And you said, I think those are fake. I said, no, I think they're real. They're fake. Dick Smith designed those breasts.
Okay. Yeah. No. I was going to say her body, she didn't have big breasts. And in that scene, she does. Yeah.
Yes. So I stand corrected. Dick Smith actually designed the Stepford breasts.
So you went and researched that?
I find these things out, when I do research.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, Dick Smith was a genius. He redefined mask making. So prosthetics weren't this big thing you put on. They were in pieces, which allowed your actors to actually communicate. He developed silicone for the first time, so you could actually see skin through the prosthetic. You're not having to gob on a bunch of makeup and try to make it look real when it was obviously looking fake. He developed squibs. He was one of the first big squib contributors, even in the 60s. And he helped develop bladders. You wouldn't have American Werewolf in London or any of that without the research that he had done to begin with.
William Peter Bladder.
Yeah, William Peter Bladder. Yeah.
I guess we should go back to scenes. That's where we left off. we kind of digressed there. Sorry. No, I did mention that though, because we didn't include makeup, and we should have included that in production. But yeah. Other scenes, you mentioned this scene, and I love this scene as well for just the striking imagery, but it's where she's stretching up and the demon statue or whatever appears behind her, all in silhouette. Totally like mind blowing. I don't know. It's one of those scenes where you're just like in awe looking at it. And it's also another one of the scenes where she's kind of mimicking the demon. I didn't realize this, but another one of my favorite scenes is the hypnotism scene.
Oh, yeah.
And in that scene, she's got her hand up, and they never explain it. but it's very similar to that statue that has its hand up in the desert. It's not like this. It's like this. But
the Pazuzu statue. Yeah.
So
even though I don't think the name is used in the movie or the book, right?
It's used in one of them, but I can't remember which.
No,
was it not used in the movie? All right, then it's in the book. It is in the book.
Okay.
Yeah. Pazuzu.
And Pazuzu was actually Mesopotamian mythology, and it was not a demon. It was he was actually a protector of young women, and was known
that's
as
a laugh compared to this movie.
The warrior of the winds, or something like that, was what the name Pazuzu meant. But Blatty kind of used him in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any other scenes you want to mention before we move on?
Those are it. I mean, almost anything with Ellen Burstyn in this movie. She is so good.
She is
in this movie. And for that reason, so is Jason Miller. Jason Miller's really strong in this movie. But then you have to say, okay, but Max von Sydow has like 1/10 the screen time as everybody else, and you remember him.
Same as Lee J. Cobb. And I think Lee J. Cobb's good too.
Yeah, they're both. Yeah. It's a great cast. I even like, what's his name? The little mousy Bert guy that dies. He was great.
Your cunting daughter. when the demon starts imitating him, I think it's actually the scene where her head turns around, and and her voice turns British, and she sounds like him.
Yeah.
You mentioned the cast. Maybe we should move on to cast.
Sure.
Wow. This could take a minute.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is.
I want to start off by saying, and you mentioned how great Ellen Burstyn is in this movie. I want to say that Ellen Burstyn is more feminist in this movie than the entire Stepford Wives movie. And we just did the Stepford Wives last week, and it is not really a feminist movie, or it doesn't know what it is. This movie, the minute you see Chris McNeil, it's like, that's a strong woman. That's a very strong woman. That's what makes it so effective when she's breaking down and not knowing where to turn because her daughter's so sick. Because, wow, this strong woman has just basically been beaten down, so to speak, literally or figuratively. Shirley MacLaine turned this role down. I'm not sure why, because William Peter Blatty was friends with her and modeled the book after her and her daughter. Did you know that?
Maybe her therapist told her it was dangerous or something.
Well, she was kind of odd when it comes to like astrology, from what I remember. But she ended up doing that stupid movie, The Possession of Joel Delaney. Instead, remember? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it probably had to do with the fact that she regretted turning this down.
Maybe these exorcism movies will make money.
But it is funny. I mean, she said she was very honored that Blatty based Chris McNeil on her because they were friends and he knew her. So she was his inspiration. Barbara Streisand and Geraldine Page declined the role.
I could see Geraldine Page doing this. I could not see Barbara Streisand doing this role.
I didn't think I could either. And then I started thinking about serious roles Barbara did, like that movie Nuts and that movie, the Prince of Tides. I was like, you know what? She might have could have done it. It would have been different. It would have been a good move for her.
Yeah, it would have.
Yeah.
It would have been pre-Moonstruck, so.
The studio's choice was Audrey Hepburn.
No.
I
mean, maybe Rosemary's Baby. Too much Rosemary's Baby.
Well, you're just thinking of haircuts, but
no, just that same kind of waifish, nice, sweet, demure, that sort of thing. I don't think that would have worked for this character.
Yeah. Anne Bancroft was another choice, and I think she would have been good, but she was pregnant, so she had to drop out, or she was dropped. They didn't consider her after they found out she was pregnant. Lee Remick, Carol Burnett, Louise Fletcher, and Raquel Welch were all considered as well.
Fletcher, yeah.
Fletcher, yeah, I could see Carol Burnett, honestly. I really could, because she can do serious stuff. But her voice might have been too disarming. She's got when she gets hysterical, I think Burnett's voice might not have worked as well.
Agreed.
I don't know if am I being too nitpicky? I don't know. Other contenders were Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds as both Chris and Regan.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It says that's according to Variety magazine. So I'm wondering if that was just made up.
But I wonder if Debbie would have gone, you can't do that to my daughter.
Maybe. Ellen Burstyn was not considered. She actively campaigned for this role. Did you know that?
Good. I did not, but I'm glad she did.
Yeah, she went as far as to call up Friedkin directly and tell him she had to play this role. And I don't know if you saw in the documentary where he was flying to New York to meet with an actress, and Ellen Burstyn tells this story.
Yes.
And she wouldn't name the actress, but he ended up calling her and saying, Ellen, you've got the part. And she's like, well, what about the other girl? He said, oh, she's a mess. She's like, well, that's not fair. We have our bad days or whatever. And he's like, no, just take it. You've got it.
Yeah, take
So
the part.
he gave it to her. So that was interesting. I'm not so sure she was grateful for it, considering that during it, she suffered a spinal injury, something I have suffered recently, and I wouldn't be grateful for it at all.
Right.
And basically, I don't know, we could get into it, but I was really just going to do cast right now. But
do cast, and then we'll get to set abuse.
And directorial abuse. Max von Sydow played Father Marin. Is it Sydow or Sydow?
I've always said Sydow.
I say Sydow because you say Sydow. So that's why I say it. Okay. He was another Oscar nominated movie. I don't know if I mentioned Ellen Burstyn had been nominated, I think, for The Last Picture Show. Peter Bogdanovich, by the way. Yep. Max von Sydow is an Oscar nominee. He's been nominated twice. He is Swedish and most known for the movie The Seventh Seal, the Ingmar Bergman movie. Mm-hmm. However, he was also in Flash Gordon.
He was Ming the Merciless.
Was he?
Yeah.
Was he Ming? I thought he was someone else.
No, he was Ming the Merciless.
But he was also in Minority Report, which is a movie that we have covered on the podcast. He was always, according to William Friedkin, his first choice to play this role.
I think you need that gravitas. I think you would need someone like him, or an Orson Welles, or someone with a lot of theatrical power to play Marin, because he has such limited screen time. I mean, he doesn't really say anything of merit in the first, the prologue section. It's basically just his reactions to everything around him. And then in the last few scenes, when he's the priest, he's basically saying the power of Christ compels you,
Do you know who the studio wanted?
Jerry Lewis, Dean Martin. No. Frank Sinatra.
Marlon Brando.
Well, wait. Godfather was just the year before this. So
when did Godfather come out? I can't remember. I was trying to
71.
look that up before we got here.
I'm pretty sure it was 71.
It was 72. So it was the year before. 72. You're right. Yeah. So he would have been just coming off of that. He would not have been terribly heavy at the time, because he wasn't that heavy in the early 70s. Of course he was an incredible actor. Incredible actor. Yeah. So I could see it.
Yeah, I could see him doing Marin. Yes.
William Friedkin immediately vetoed this, saying if Brando's in the film, it'll become a Brando movie, and that is not what he wanted. That takes us back to what we were saying. These are ordinary people. Brando would have made it he would have been a little bit too super oriented,
a star vehicle.
Yeah. What else? Okay, Lee J. Cobb, another Oscar winner for a Marlon Brando movie, On the Waterfront.
On the Waterfront.
Yeah, one of my favorites, actually. He played Lieutenant Kinderman, the detective, who I'm not sure if you read this, and it makes perfect sense, went on to inspire Columbo, the character Columbo. And it makes sense. He's kind of a disheveled detective that's always scratching his head and asking questions.
And he's always doing it in that kind of, I already know the answer to the question I'm about to ask you,
but I want to see what you say.
But I want to see what you say.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And that was definitely a Columbo trait. Yeah.
Yeah. He was also in 12 Angry Men and Exodus, just to give you some.
He played juror number
context.
3 in 12 Angry Men. That's the good part. He's great in that. Oh man.
The actress
Henry Fonda.
Yeah, the actress Kitty Wynn played Sharon.
Oh, okay.
It's a small part in the movie. It's a little larger in the book. And one of the reasons it's smaller in the movie is they cut the spider walk scene, which we'll probably talk about. Well, actually, I guess we could have already talked about it because the scenes that cut. But she specifically chases Sharon when she is the spider or whatever, goes after her on her hands and knees, like with the lizard tongue trying to lick her. Anyway, that's beside the point. She has a very small resume. It ended in 1984. So I guess she retired. However, she won a Best Actress award in Cannes for the Panic in Needle Park movie.
Never seen that.
I haven't either. I've heard of it, but I just thought it was interesting that she's in this film, in that small role. Somebody famous auditioned for her role of Sharon. Do you know who that is? And I did mention this the first time we did this.
Debbie Reynolds.
Jill Clayburgh. Who I guess would have been
young then, right?
Fairly young then. Yeah. I mean, but she's young in the movie. She's like a nanny, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Or housekeeper. Yeah. Okay. You have mentioned Burke Dennings.
Yes.
This guy was played by Jack McGowran. He is an Irish actor. Obviously, you can hear the British accent when he speaks. He is in another one of my favorite movies, The Quiet Man. John Ford movie with John Wayne. He was in a Roman Polanski movie, The Fearless Vampire Killers.
Yep.
And he was in Darby O'Gill and The Little People. All of these are somewhat UK related films, you would say. So, there's no other choices for him. Obviously, he got that role because he was good at it. I don't know much about him, except that he reminds me of another British actor, and I can't think of who it is.
He reminds me a lot of John Hurt.
Okay.
It's
not John Hurt I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of like a Doctor Who actor, maybe. Or oh no, it's Rowan Atkinson. That's who he reminds me of. The guy that plays the Black Adder.
Black Adder.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's who he reminds me of. Jason Miller played Father Karras. He is the one I have the most notes on. Lots of people in line to play this.
Okay.
He was, I think, more of a stage actor, wasn't he?
Yes.
Okay.
He came from theater.
Which is probably why he got the part, because they
went back
want
there
a
too.
famous face.
Went back there too.
Okay.
He spent a lot of his career in theater.
I was going to say, he doesn't really have a lot of notable film roles at all, other than this. But I think Friedkin specifically wanted him because he wasn't a familiar face. Because get this, these are people that were considered, and I'm sure most of these were from the studio, but it was Jack Nicholson, too demonic himself, Dustin Hoffman, Warren Beatty, Burt Reynolds. This is the 70s, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
Ryan O'Neal, Peter Fonda, Al Pacino, John Voight, Robert Blake, Christopher Walken, Alain Delon, I'm not sure who that is, James Caan, Roy Scheider, Paul Newman, Marlon Brando. You know, he could have played Marin. I don't see him playing Harris at all. Elliot Gould, Alan Alda, George Hamilton. Alan Alda,
Okay.
to me, I would not watch this movie again. I think it was Alan Alda. I just can't stomach him anymore. He gets on my nerves.
Yeah.
He has a ho-hum film resume. This is his film debut. He was Oscar nominated for this movie. And the only other two movies of note that I recognized him in are The Championship Season and Rudy, that football movie.
Yeah. And that championship season he wrote. That was his story.
Okay.
He
According to William Peter Blatty, director Friedkin also considered Gene Hackman, who would have been good. But again, I think you want to get away from that familiar face. And he was coming off of French Connection.
Yeah, see, I would have cast Hackman as Kinderman.
Hackman would have been better as Kinderman. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, not as
I can see that.
Karras. I think now you said Al Pacino. He could have done Karras. He could have done Karras pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I could see. I mean, there's a few in there that I could see, not Nicholson or Hoffman or Warren Beatty, but definitely Pacino, maybe John Voight.
Maybe. I mean,
I almost want to say Robert Blake. I could almost see Robert Blake doing it.
Yeah. And he would have probably brought a little bit more street cred kind of feel to
Beretta.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking In Cold Blood. He was in Cold Blood too.
The thing that he did so well with casting was giving, because Jason Miller was a kind of an unknown. So again, going back to your realism thing, and he plays the conflict so well. This guy who is so guilt-ridden that he's actually thinking of changing his entire career in order to, to deal with it, because he is so guilty about his mother and everything else and his faith. And that's like his whole job kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then lastly, Friedkin also considered Roy Scheider for the role, but Blatty vetoed him. Blatty said no.
Yeah.
So you can tell Blatty was working with him hand in hand on this movie, and it showed in those documentaries. It's a good thing that Friedkin didn't have so much of an ego that he cut him out.
Agreed. I also thought it was interesting that like Ellen and the rest of them start calling them Bill and Billy. Instead of William and William. They call him Bill and Billy. Yeah.
That's funny. Okay, on to Linda Blair. I want to say something very much like, what's that? Who?
I said, who? Who's she? No one's ever heard of her.
Well, very much like when I said that I wanted to say something about Ellen Burstyn being a feminist in this movie, I want to say something about Linda Blair before I go into this. I think Linda Blair is excellent in this fucking movie. And I think that this whole controversy of her being nominated for an Academy Award and that Mercedes McCambridge kind of null and voiding it as being the voice, I totally disagree, because a lot of the beginning of this movie, it's Linda Blair. It's not Mercedes McCambridge at all. And she's great as the kid.
Right. And Mercedes is dubbing lines after Linda has acted them.
Right.
So, and that's with a lot of coaching and multiple retakes and everything else. And Linda is doing it in the freezing cold, in a negligee, strapped to a bed with makeup all over her face. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
I totally think she deserved the Academy Award nomination. Now, if they wanted to give Mercedes a special one, if she won, okay, sure. Yeah. That's fine. Sure. Just like they gave, Shirley Temple gave Walt Disney the Seven Dwarfs one or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. Just something like a special thing. Anyway.
Well, but the maturity of effects has gotten better too. So, like Andy Serkis can win an Academy Award for a performance where he CGI'd all over his face.
Yeah, true.
He can be nominated and stuff. Yeah. And so we've come a long way with how acting is a combination of effects helping you act.
Yeah.
You know, if
Now,
you
that
can
being
give
said,
yeah,
I will say she has the child actor's curse because I don't think she matured into a good adult actor. She really didn't.
no,
If you see
she did
some of
not.
her other movies, you'll know what I mean.
What was
But
the
as a
what
child,
was the one that comes to mind? What was the prison one? It was terrible, but it was another
I think I
controversial.
have it in here somewhere.
Some kind of prison movie where she was raped in prison or something.
Savage Streets,
No, I thought it
Roller
was something
Boogie.
different. Roller Boogie. No, not that
That's
one.
what I'm saying, man. She was not cast in
Yeah.
very good movies after this. And maybe why she's not supposedly not in this upcoming reboot, but I have a feeling they're going to bring her in somehow. Okay. Producers sought to have Jamie Lee Curtis audition for the role, but Janet Leigh refused.
Makes sense.
And Jamie Lee Curtis would have been almost the right age. She might have been a little older because she was in Halloween, 5 years later.
5 years later. Yeah.
And she was supposed to be a teenager in that. So maybe, but I don't think she was. I think she was 20 something when she was in that. Sharon Stone was considered. She would have been young at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Denise Nickerson, who played Violet Beauregard in Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory, was considered, but the material troubled her parents too much, and they pulled her out of consideration.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine they would have had a hard time getting this cast. Laura Dern and Eve Plum of Brady Bunch
Bunch. Yeah.
auditioned. Kim Basinger and Melanie Griffith also auditioned.
Okay.
Out of all of those, the one I would have wanted to see the most is probably Laura Dern because she's the one I respect the most of all of those.
Yep. Performance wise, yes.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Sure, go ahead.
No, you.
Well, I was going to say 3 sitcom stars were up for the role. Anissa Jones, she was Buffy on Family Affair.
Oh, okay.
Didn't she die of an overdose? I think she did.
I thought so too. Yeah.
Oh, yes, she did because Dana Plato was also up and she died of an overdose because 2 of the people that were up. So you can throw that in the Exorcist curse. There you go.
It's the curse. See? Yeah.
And then Eve Plum. So Eve Plum, Dana Plato, and Anissa Jones were all television actresses that were considered for the role. And Anissa and Dana died at very young ages of drug addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I've already mentioned she was a curse of the child actress. I don't think she went on to be a very good adult actress. Sorry, Linda. No offense. I do love you. One last thing about her, though, due to death threats against her from religious zealots who believed the film glorified Satan, she had to have a bodyguard protecting her 6 months after this film was made.
Post movie, yeah. And and that was paid for by the studio and everything. They had to do that for her. Yeah.
That is wild.
Well, and I think I also have in my notes that, so many actresses either auditioned and or turned down the roles, or their parents turned down the roles because of the material. Her mother actually brought her to the auditions.
She kind of campaigned for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Campaign. Her agency didn't even offer her up as a possibility. And her mother forced it, kind of thing, which is great for her.
And they were talking about, the fact that she has to say all these awful things and do all these awful things. And that I guess her mother coached her or whoever her acting coaches were, that it's a character you're playing. This is not you. So like when Max von Sydow or Ellen Burstyn would say, how do you feel about saying these things? Linda Blair would just look at him and go, oh, that's not me.
Right. Yeah.
So she's very educated.
That's in a couple of the documentaries where she says, that's not me, that's Regan. It's just
right.
a character.
Which that's great. I mean, I don't know.
And they said,
would you want your daughter
everybody got
playing
along with her? She was fun and happy and just a little kid on set, and then suddenly would turn around and go, your mother's so,
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm not a dad, but you've had a daughter. What would you think if your daughter was up for this role?
I would support her. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not. I don't think you're going to be scarred by the material, or hopefully not physically hurt like she was. That's not
Well,
something
she
you would
was,
want
yeah.
to happen. And that, but again, I think that was a little bit of an accident and a little bit of encouragement, sort of thing. I found that one of those documentaries was really weird because the practical effects guy, who was very good, by the way, I thought he was really great with all the practical effects that had to go on, especially in that room and all the harness work and everything else. But when he's talking about, especially the two major injuries on set, he's giggling while he's telling the story. And it just made me feel uncomfortable. I don't know if that was him being nervous about telling it. So he's kind of like trying to make light of it. But he's going, and then Billy told me, yeah, just really yanked the hell out of her. So I did.
Well, I saw one where he said, and it may not have been the same one, it may have been a different interview, where he said that he told Ellen Burstyn, okay, and looked at the guy, don't do it as hard. But that when she walked away, he like winked at the guy or like made a facial gesture saying, do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the one I saw.
Saying jerk the hell out of her. Yeah.
Basically, but not actually saying it, just signaling it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now with Linda, when she was doing it, he was actually, that was an actual mistake. That wasn't a Friedkin thing because the harness had loosened. So instead of it being so tight around her so that she could be thrashed around, every time he was pulling her, she was using momentum. So when he was pulling back, she was going forward. And then when he would pull back, she would fall forward. And so it was actually hurting her.
Yeah, and I don't understand why they did that at all. Why didn't they just use a dummy? Because you could make a realistic dummy doing that.
Well, because I think they wanted her thrashing and talking and everything else.
Well, she's screaming the whole time, mother, make it stop, or whatever. But I have a feeling that's dubbed because I don't think you would hear her doing that effectively as she's being thrashed like that.
Some of it might have been, but some of it's in there because she actually says in interviews that she was saying, no, it hurts. It hurts. And she says that, in the film.
Yeah.
But she was saying it hurts, meaning, guys, this is hurting me.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just think that was unnecessary. The thing with Chris needed to happen. The thing with Regan did not. I think they could have used a dummy. But anyway, William O'Malley played Father Dyer. As you mentioned, he is a real reverend and not really an actor. He was an advisor or consultant, and I do have that. This is his only movie. He teaches at Fordham University and Fordham Preparatory School in the Bronx. I thought he was great for someone that has no experience. I thought he was so good in this. Now from what I understand, in that last scene when he's doing Karras's last rites, not Bogdanovich, damn it, William Friedkin slapped him to get the reaction he wanted.
Yeah.
That he wasn't emotional enough. So William Friedkin hauled off and slapped the shit out of him and just said, roll it, and had him do the same.
I saw a documentary with him. Again, it's the 50th anniversary, so there are documentaries out there you guys can watch.
Well, most of them are from the 25th anniversary, but yes.
Yeah. And there's a lot of trivia about this movie, but he said that they were filming. It was 2:00 in the morning. They had done it 17 times, this entire speech. And what Friedkin didn't understand was that as priests, they're supposed to not get emotional. When you are consoling a family who is dealing with death and grief and all of that, you're not supposed to start weeping or being upset or anything else. And Friedkin tried all the tricks. Imagine this is your father. Imagine this is your best friend. Imagine, all this kind of stuff. And nothing worked. And finally, he came to Friedkin and said, look, I'm exhausted. We've done it over and over. Something in there has to be good. And Friedkin said, do you trust me? And he said, yeah. And he hauled off and smacked the
shit out of him.
And he said that's why his hand is trembling, because he said that was totally uncontrollable. Those were nerves. I had so much adrenaline in me then that I couldn't. But that's the take they used.
Yeah.
Which kind of, I guess that's a good segue into going to Friedkin's on-set abuse, I guess, so to speak.
Well, I've got a couple of other things in casting.
Casting. Do casting.
They're very small. Barton Heyman is a character actor who played Dr. Klein. The only thing of mention is he's in Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which I love that title, and The Basketball Diaries, Raising Cain, and Dead Men Walking. So he was a character actor that did a lot of movies. And then Peter Masterson, who I mentioned because we just covered the Stepford Wives, and he played the husband of the Joanna character in the Stepford Wives, the main character. He played Dr. Berenger, the clinic director. And the only thing I will briefly mention that we mentioned during Stepford Wives is he's known for adapting the Playboy article that became the best little whorehouse in Texas.
Yep.
That just kind of that's mind boggling. I mean, you talk about William Peter Blatty milking The Exorcist for his entire career. Well, I would say Peter Masterson probably milked the best little whorehouse in Texas his entire career. And then lastly, we need to talk about Mercedes McCambridge. She did the voice of Regan as the demon. She insisted on swallowing raw eggs and chain smoking to get her voice to sound that way. I don't know why raw eggs would do that. But I wouldn't do
that. The phlegm sound.
Gross.
You're used to a phlegm sound, Tim.
Yeah, I am. I have bad allergies. She had problems with alcohol abuse in the past, but furthermore wanted to drink whiskey because she knew it would distort her voice. I think that's a lousy excuse.
But I have that in my notes. I have cigarettes, raw eggs, and she came off the wagon to do the dubbing session.
Right.
Yep.
But you never see her in the movie, but you hear her in the movie. She is Regan's alter ego.
At one point in the recordings, Blatty actually, or Friedkin, actually strapped her down to a chair to restrict her and make her feel frustrated.
Yeah, I saw that too. That's all I have on cast. But do you want to do what you were mentioning, or do you want me to do awards?
No, let's do that, and then we'll do awards, and then we'll go into Q.
Okay, sure.
That makes sense. So the we've talked in the past about, we come from theater. I've directed a bunch, everything else too. So, we understand directors, and we've talked about, Orson Welles gimmicks, Stanley Kubrick gimmicks, Alfred Hitchcock gimmicks. I mean, things that, by gimmick, I mean things that they would do on set to manipulate and get performances that they need, whether they're working with seasoned actors or not seasoned actors. But that can be borderline abusive, especially by today's standards. I think the stories that you hear about The Exorcist in today's standard would be difficult to do this movie, I think. Even the harnessing and the stuff that they're doing with Linda Blair, I think you would be hard pressed to get on screen in today's modern environment, I guess, or culture.
Well, yeah, like I said, use a dummy.
Right.
Don't jeopardize the health of the actor.
Even now, if you have any kind of physicality on a set right now, you're required to have an intimacy coordinator. And by physicality, it can be as simple as holding hands. If you are holding hands with another actor on a set, you have to pay to have an intimacy coordinator come in and make sure that you're both comfortable doing that. And if that intimacy coordinator went back to 1972, I guess, and went on the set of The Exorcist, they would probably freak out because William Friedkin did a lot of manipulation on set. He would say one thing to one character and then say something totally different to another to get them to be at odds with each other, which is kind of simple. That's okay, fine. But when you tell an actress, no, don't worry, that was, when your actress comes to you and the special effects guy and says, that was too hard, that could hurt me, and I don't want to be hurt. And you go, don't worry about it. We're not going to do it that hard next time. And she walks away and you wink at the guy, meaning do it harder. Then that kind of borderlines abuse.
I agree totally.
For For Karras, he started shooting off guns.
Yeah.
He would shoot guns on the set at random times to unnerve the actors.
Yeah. And that's another thing too. I mean, people don't want to be around guns.
In general. Yes. And my thought when I read this, because this is in several documentaries and several books of trivia about The Exorcist, I was thinking, were these real guns or were they blanks? What is
I was wondering that too. And
on a set, are you putting holes in the ceiling and the walls? And
that's exactly what I thought. What is going on here? They must have been blanks.
But yeah, so I'm assuming they must have been blanks. But he used a variety of gauges. He used a variety of weapons, one of them shotguns. There's an interview with Sydow where he says, after a couple of weeks on the set, when I would come in, I would go to the makeup guy and go, or the assistant director and go, okay, where are the guns today? And they go, oh, there's one behind the wall over there. He's got one in the desk drawer over here. And there's a shotgun behind the door. And you go, okay. Shit, I'm going, really? He really did it that often that they planted them everywhere and he considered it, something you just had to have on.
I mean, I would think it could cause damage to people's ears if it was close.
Well, yeah. And that's what, what's his name said? Karras, the guy who played Karras.
Jason Miller.
Jason Miller.
Yeah, he was pissed off about it.
Because in the movie, the reaction to the phone ringing is a direct result of a gunshot blast. He's listening to the tape and all of a sudden the phone rings and he turns around really startled.
I didn't realize that's when it was. Okay.
That is an actual one. And it
is a jump scare. It's probably one of the only jump scares in the movie. Yeah.
And he has a line where in one of the documentaries where he says, and I went to Billy right after that and went, don't fucking do that to me again. I'm an actor. I can do it. But it didn't stop him. He kept doing it all over the set all the time at random times, even in the middle of a sweet, nice romantic scene, just to unnerve them. So they start feeling tense and nervous about, please don't do it again, kind of thing. And that added, he said, to the performances.
I don't know about that, but
other things that he did that I kind of agree with, though, sort of like he said, I want to see their breath. It is important that I see their breath.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And
I thought that was
just
brilliant.
Done with CGI, but yeah.
But they had to bring in, like 5 refrigeration units and freeze that setup. Linda Blair is in a negligee, a little nightgown with a sheet, and the rest of the crew and the director are all in parkas and hoods and gloves and everything. And he said, but even with that, because the lighting took so long to set up and do, they would freeze this set. So literally get it down to like 0 degrees in there. And then they would come in, start to light it, everything else. Within like 2 hours, it's too hot in there and they can't see their breath anymore. So they would all have to leave and cool it all down again and come back.
Oh, I read that just the actors alone would warm up the set, but the lights do.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And especially in that scene, the lighting is so incredibly good all the way through it.
And they also had to have like a humidifier because the air was drying out by being reduced with air conditioning. And you have to have moisture to get the breath. And did you read that? So they were like, we were getting the set cold enough, but there was no breath being seen. They had to bring moisture into the room as well.
And they said that they had to adjust that because then one day they come in the next morning and there's snow on the set.
Yes, I did see that. Now you're talking about cursed productions. That's what I think about as far as cursed, when something's always going wrong.
Yeah. And Linda Blair said that she thinks that's why she still does not like the cold at all. She can't handle cold weather in any way. Because weeks and weeks in that set. Weeks and weeks on that set.
She might be from New York. I can't remember where she's from.
New York. Yeah.
Any other abuse stories?
Well, just the other stuff of just production stuff. It's kind of interesting. The vomit that you see actually hit him was a mistake. I did know that. The special effects guy was supposed to hit the sweater They had done it 2 or 3 times. It wasn't blasty enough. It wasn't big enough. Everything else, Friedkin said, give me more, give me more. When he gave him more, he adjusted the nozzle too hard and pulled too hard. And it went right into Jason Miller's face, which is the scene they kept.
Right, because they shot one more take of it where it goes on his chest afterwards. They cleaned him up, got him back in, but they used the first take, which is the one where it goes in his mouth. Yeah.
And it works. It works for me.
It's
that
great.
was a special, that vomit rig was a special design by Dick Smith to be able to do it. Let's see. What have I got under these little notes? Slap the Priest. We had that. The very Friedkin all the way through, even in pre-production, was talking with Blatty about it and saying, I want the movie to be light and dark. So I want to go from really, really bright, like medical scenes, to really dark bedrooms and alleys and the school, the Jesuit school. I want to go from a bright hallway interior to a really dark bedroom, because that's the forces of light and evil fighting each other. And I want people to start feeling that way. I thought,
that's
cool.
very interesting, because without going into it too much, I like a band called the Pixies, and they specialize in music that's loud, quiet, loud. Nirvana was very inspired by them, and Nirvana replicated that sound. And in this movie, it's the same. The sound is amazing in this movie because it can go from really, really quiet to really, really loud. Which,
and that's
to me,
you said that was my next note. He did the same thing. He said the audio should be the same way.
That's what I was going to say. It's like the same thing, visually and audibly. Loud, quiet, loud, white, black, white.
But think about it. Even in that prologue, you are immediately hit with the music, and then it gets quiet. And you go from this huge wind, this huge sound, tempest kind of thing, to nothing. You go from her, that all the horse hooves and the clattering and everything of him almost getting run over, and then suddenly it cuts and he's just sitting having a drink, and you're not hearing anything. And he does that all the way through. Regan screaming to total silence. And I think that's another reason why he said he didn't use a lot of supplemental music, because it would continue the through line of the volume. And you can't get those smart cuts unless there's no music at all. They worked with Catholic priests. I think that's all my notes that I've got in there.
Really? Not Protestant?
Yeah, no.
I have. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Do your.
Well, I mean, I meant to mention these when we were talking about scenes, but they're not really impactful scenes so much. But I noticed things this time that I didn't notice in other viewings. One is there's 2 quick shots of Regan where she is lying down and her eye opens, and I'm like, both times I'm like, ooh. I never realized how creepy that is. One of them is the shot when Chris goes into the attic to investigate the sound. There's a quick shot of Regan on the bed and her eye open, or her eye is open. And then there's another one she does when Chris goes up to kiss her goodnight and goes back down to the party. She leaves and Regan's eye opens. And they're both scenes where like her head is like, horizontal. Laying, and I just found those very effective. And then another scene that's really, really quick is when they're going upstairs. You see the light bulb flicker, the little candlelight bulb flicker, and I love that too. Just those little touches that he does add so much. It's like seasoning to a very good meal,
And it's all building. It's all slowly building up. It's just little references, not this huge jump scare scream. I can twist my body backwards or
fuck that.
walls.
Yeah.
You said scenes and how important it is. The poster scene, the scene with the arrival of the Exorcist, took them over a week to shoot. Just that one shot of the house outside at night, the car pulling up, and him getting out and standing there. And Blatty said, because I want it's got to be realistic first, but it's got to be surrealistic in the fact that this is his arrival. This is his entrance into this.
And they used a spotlight.
Yeah, to get the shaft.
Yeah, I never really thought of it being a spotlight until I saw that documentary. And now that I look at it in that picture behind me, it's clearly a spotlight. It's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the last one, I guess I've got in the pre-production, the kind of stuff. It's kind of a key though, so it might be a good segue. Is Friedkin was really obsessed with sound design and audio design and layering audio, layering Mercedes and Linda Blair and maybe some goats in there, something else, just so there's a lot of sound editing, especially for the demon. He got that way because he took the sound editor to the library and he pulled out a book of Hieronymus Bosch, the very, very graphic horror artist.
Didn't he do that thing behind you?
Yeah,
it looks like something he would do if it wasn't.
It's very Hieronymus,
yeah.
but Hieronymus Bosch has inspired a lot of horror. But anyway, he said, I want the demon's voice to sound like Hieronymus Bosch's paintings. And I thought that's a cool key, that he was influenced by how visceral and visual those images are. And he said, I want the audio to hit you the same way. And I was going, okay, that's cool. That's a good director kind of thing. Yeah. William Peter Blatty wanted a happy ending, and William Friedkin did not. That's why they have the cuts that they have in it.
Yes. And the original movie ends with Dyer's profile in front of the boarded up window.
Mm-hmm.
And the director's cut, or whatever, the Blatty version, ends with Dyer and Kinderman meeting. Kinderman is late getting there before Chris leaves. And so they strike up a conversation very similar to the conversation he has with Karras earlier on, where they bond over movies.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they talk about as they're walking away kind of thing.
Right.
And then we hear tubular bells.
And I actually like that scene where they're walking away. I don't
too.
mind that. That one, I don't like all of the scenes that Blatty wanted reinstated, but that one in particular doesn't bother me at all.
Well, there's an interview where they're talking about it, and Friedkin said really the reason he cut it was because it gives you hope. And I thought, yeah, well,
okay.
True. Life will go on after this exorcism.
I mean, I think that's kind of ridiculous on Friedkin's part, because, I mean, to me, the hope is when Regan embraces the priest and kisses him before they leave.
Kisses the collar. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we need to do awards before we move on to keys. I mentioned Academy Awards. This is the first horror film to be nominated for an Academy Best Picture. So I'm guessing Rosemary was not up for Best Picture. I don't know.
Nope.
The only others were Get Out in 2017, Jaws in 1975, Silence of the Lambs in 1991, and The Sixth Sense in 1999. The only one of those that I just mentioned that won was Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs. Yeah.
So that shows you how long it has taken for the Academy to get on the horror bandwagon. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that horror was B movies, and these are all A movies.
Oh, yeah. All of them. Yeah.
Linda Blair, we talked about this as well, but received her Best Supporting Actress nomination before it was widely known that previous Supporting Actress winner, Mercedes McCambridge, had actually provided the voice of the demon. By Academy rules, once Blair was given the nomination, it could not be withdrawn, but there was a controversy about her being given credit over another actress's work, and thus ruined her chances at winning. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I think that's a crock of Duke.
Okay. As far as the Oscars overall, it was nominated for Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Director.
Mm-hmm.
It did not win any of those.
No,
it didn't win any, I guess. Didn't it win? I guess it didn't win for sound or anything, did it?
It did win. It won.
I don't have any wins.
Best screenplay and best sound.
So it did win those. I must have forgot to put those in my notes. I'm sorry. Because my notes go straight to the BAFTAs. And the BAFTAs are the British equivalent of the Academy Award. It was nominated there for Best Soundtrack, And I don't have anything else. Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror, which is more in our territory, they do the Saturn Awards. It won Best Horror Film and Best Writer.
Okay.
Golden Globes gave it Best Picture, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Screenplay. It was nominated for Promising Newcomer and Best Actress. So Golden Globes even gave it 3 awards. So,
Good.
and it is on that list that we always talk about. The 1001 movies you must see before you die. The Exorcist is on it. 1973.
Well, and you just kind of inspired me when you were talking about awards. And I don't know why I've never done this before, but I look back and a science fiction film has never won an Oscar for Best Picture.
Probably not.
That sucks. Those freaking Oscars.
2001 was nominated, wasn't it?
Not for Best Picture. It was nominated.
It wasn't?
No,
Really?
It was nominated for visual effects and for one direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, has never won an Academy Award. That just pisses me off. Anyway. All right.
Sorry. My awards are kind of jumbled here lately because IMDb changed their format and I can't cut and paste them easy anymore. So I'm having to piece them together, and that's why I screwed them up. But anyway, that was it.
So the win for Best Picture that year was The Sting. So that's
Makes
what won
sense.
Best Picture.
George Roy Hill.
But I also have that. Did you get the Golden Globes? It was
It won several Golden Globes.
It won 4. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I had that. It won Best Picture, Best Supporting Actress, and Screenplay. I don't know what the fourth one was.
I have Picture, Director, Actress, and Screenplay.
So we got Director too. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So those are the awards, and we've talked about a bunch of keys already. We could just go into keys and
Yeah, I think we should.
yeah. Every movie with an exorcism since then.
I'm not putting those all on the show notes. Sorry.
No, but I mean, even The Last Exorcism, The Possession, The Exorcism of
Emily Rose.
Yeah, all of those, even up to this year, The Pope's Exorcist, that one with what's his name in it.
I think put that in my notes. The one it's Gladiator guy, Russell Crowe.
Yeah. So you've got the current sequel we've already mentioned. Unofficial official sequel with Ellen Burstyn is coming out. So that's definitely a key to it.
But yeah, we can well, I don't guess we really need to talk much more about it. I was going to say we could have saved that to the end, but it's not, we've already talked mostly about it. So
yeah.
Mine, I think we mentioned in our previous podcast, the excavation kind of reminded us of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm like, I'm not going to put that. I'm going to put The Mummy. It reminds me more of The Mummy because The Mummy's a horror movie.
Yep, that's good.
So all of the stuff in the beginning when Marin is in Iraq excavating.
Since we originally did the podcast, we actually covered The Mummy, and that whole scene is the same. Where they find it and go, I go running to show it to the archaeologist guy. That's right. The Mummy.
I agree, and that's why I was like, you know what, this fits more along the lines of The Mummy than it does Raiders. So.
Well, and since we covered it this season too, it's also similar to that scene at the beginning of Jurassic where they run and grab the guy and bring him into the mine to show him the amber. It's similar to that too, as far as inspiration goes.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. You're right. Instead of artifacts, it's dinosaurs. But yeah.
I've got the spider walk, even though it was edited, it was very popular and probably led to stuff like The Grudge, The Ring, a lot of that Japanese horror with the little girl who is the terror of it. And she has the hair in her face and thrashes around and all that.
I've got obviously Rosemary's Baby because they're both devil films and they're both mainstream devil films. And they're both directed by mainstream directors.
Poltergeist. Poltergeist has, her thrashing along the bed and everything else, which is very Exorcist-esque.
Honestly, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because I wasn't going to put it, but I started thinking about it when I was talking about the hypnotism scene earlier. The way she answers those questions reminds me of Carol Ann talking to the television.
Yes. Yeah, that
a
same
lot.
kind of
I mean, 'cause she's like, yes, no, yes. And I'm like, that's exactly like Carol Ann talking to the TV in Poltergeist.
Yeah. And JoBeth Williams bouncing all over the bed and being pulled and around and everything. That's very Exorcist.
Yeah. That's funny.
I don't know why I've got it in my notes, but Demons, Dario Argento.
I love that movie, but I don't know why you would have it in your notes. I do. I adore that movie, but I don't know why you would have it in your notes, except for the fact that it's a demon.
Well, demons in general, that would lead to like the Evil Deads and all that too.
Well, Evil Dead is definitely a key because of the sclerotic contact lenses. She looks like what I consider a demon because her eyes go white, just like they do in those Evil Dead movies. Of course, this was first, but so I would.
Well, the Evil Dead also has the gag where the clock stops, and that's
that. You know what? That is why I had Evil Dead listed actually, and I did. Oh, okay. I forgot I already had it. I was sitting there adding it, and the clock pendulum. As soon as it stopped, I was like, oh. I don't remember that.
That's Evil Dead. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very Evil Dead. One that kind of took me by surprise, and we have watched this movie since we did this, which is kind of great because we were getting all this retrospect. The Innocents.
Yes.
When Karis is beating her and saying, take me, there's a scene where the woman in The Innocents is beating Miles because he's possessed by the spirit of Quint and he dies. Very, very similar. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. I get it. And that was from 1961, almost 12 years earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one. And I thought the same thing. As soon as I watched it this time, I went, oh, because I hadn't seen The Innocents before. So it inspired me on that one. I've got, you mentioned Rosemary. I've got The Omen and The Sentinel. Both of those. Sentinel especially feels, I think also because Rick Baker did the Dick Smith did the makeup for that one as well. But the Sentinel especially reminds me of,
I know you like that
heavily
movie.
influenced by The Exorcist. Yeah.
I have The Omen specifically because of the Iraq scene that you were talking about where he almost gets hit by the car. That reminds me of like those weird accidents that were happening in The Omen.
Yes.
Where the guy gets his head cut off because a car backs, the brakes come off a car and it starts rolling. So, but I mean, obviously The Omen is a devil movie too. So, and it's also mainstream. So there's a lot of reasons why this movie has keys to The Omen.
Yeah. And it's also essentially an atheist coming to grips with Catholicism because his son is possessed. So it's that kind of thing too. Another 70s icon, Amityville. And I got that one because of Jody and Captain Howdy. Both the kids in it have an imaginary friend who's actually a freaking demon.
Yes, exactly. And one's named Jody and one's named Captain Howdy. Yeah, I had not even thought about that. That's great. That's a really good key.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have, since again, I had not seen it the first time we saw it, but the first time we reviewed this movie, but I've seen it since. Dragged Me to Hell. That has all of the, I want to say the bad tropes, but it has all the negative exorcism. It's done with extreme unrealistic horror all the way through it.
I still like it though.
I do. Yes, I know.
It's Sam Raimi.
but this one, but you can definitely see the parallels and the inverse of that. we don't need to see the eye fly through the sky. We can just see the
No,
vomit,
and I would also put Drag Me to Hell in the category of a B movie. I wouldn't consider it an A movie as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. I have, just because they feature weird children, The Bad Seed and Village of the Damned.
Oh, yeah. That's weird.
I mean, they're not necessarily possessed, but they are evil.
Definitely. I've got Halloween because of two things. The first time we hear the music, Tubular Bells.
Yeah, it's very
is when iconic. Chris is walking down the street with all the leaves of fall or falling and all that kind of stuff.
No,
and it's very.
It's not the mamas and the papas, but yeah,
right.
California dreaming.
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. But you're right. The first of all, the music is iconic, very similar to Halloween. But there is also a scene where Jamie Lee Curtis is walking in a fall setting of a quaint neighborhood, and Ellen Burstyn is walking in Georgetown with the leaves as well. So it's very, very similar. Yeah, totally get that. I have King Lear.
Interesting.
Because the character's name is Regan. And one of the three daughters in King Lear is Regan. And Regan in King Lear is the meanest one. Goneril
is the president of the United States because just kidding. I
don't know. I specifically think a girl named Regan. That's a pretty strong key.
That is
because Regan is not a name you really associate with women. You don't associate it as a first name really at all.
No.
But he did it in King Lear, 400 years ago. So
I have and this is kind of directly cultural keys or influences or whatever. I think this was the first time we saw the Ouija board as a bad thing. This started that whole they're possessed and you'll call a demon up with a Ouija board and all that. And so that led to, the movie, that led to Paranormal Activity, Witch Board, all those who have a Ouija board as an evil communication tool kind of thing. But I also think that this movie, along with the other horror tropes that came in the 70s, led to that whole 80s satanic panic crap that happened all over the country.
Some of it. I think Rosemary did too prior.
Yes, that's what I mean. Rosemary, this, and like I said, The Omen.
I mean, I always equated also with Manson, because Manson was putting X's on his forehead and acting demonic and crazy too.
That's interesting too. Yeah, I think it's a culmination that led to this whole we're afraid of darkness within us kind of thing.
Fringe.
Everywhere.
Yeah. I have Psycho because of that shot of the psychiatrist that's getting his balls squeezed going down on the floor.
That is the exact same method. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like basically the camera is following him the same way it followed the detective in Psycho down the stairs.
I also think you can think it's a key because of the cultural influence that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
for sure.
it was a hugely popular movie at the time. So yeah, I would agree with that.
And ironically enough, Psycho is Alfred's attempt to do a B movie, and it ended up being a mainstream movie anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a weird one, which I found in a documentary that I was watching.
Okay.
The Zodiac, the serial killer.
Are you talking about the movie with Jake Gyllenhaal?
The actual serial killer who said that was never caught.
Okay.
In communication said that he was inspired by The Exorcist. That movie inspired him to instill fear in people. And Jeffrey Dahmer, another serial killer, said that he was inspired by Exorcist 3 Legion, the novel that Blatty looked and turned into the movie.
So that really isn't a key. That's a key to that movie.
Right. It's a key to that one, but still the Exorcist legacy. I guess, sort of.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that's all I had except for stuff that I lifted. I have to read this verbatim because this is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Gene Siskel talked to Peter Benchley, who wrote Jaws, right after The Exorcist came out. In an interview, Peter Benchley told me the film of his novel Jaws had been made with one overriding intention: to scare the hell out of the audience the same way The Exorcist had done. Benchley went on to say that portions of the book had been changed in order to accomplish that goal. For example, the romance between Brody's wife and the Hooper character sent to investigate the shark was eliminated because they wanted more horror. Well, we mentioned that earlier on when I said they took a lot of the detective and mystery story out of the novel. I mean, they took it out of the film, but it was in the novel. And I agree. I mean, I don't know that this movie's better than the book, but I do think Jaws is better than the book.
Oh, yeah.
Its book. Yeah. I mean, separate them. I'm not sure that The Exorcist is better than the novel, The Exorcist, but I do think the movie Jaws is better than the novel Jaws.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I've said that a million times.
And
go ahead.
And I have a key that I have a question about the key. I'm not sure what it is, but we talked about this recently, I think within the past year. But I have in my notes, lots of these scenes really end with no ending. There's no summation to the scene. The scene like suddenly, and we're suddenly in a different scene. Like, I think I'm having a crisis of faith. Boom, cut. We don't hear the rest of that scene with him and
I love it.
We're somewhere else. There was another movie we watched recently, and we talked about that. We talked about, and I can't remember, and I didn't know if you would remember it all either. We watched so many, but when we talked about it, we talked about the fact that the scenes don't have resolutions. The scenes like almost always end in a question, and then suddenly we're on to a different scene. And I can't remember what movie it was. So anyway, there is a movie out there like that, folks. If you remember us more than we do, let me know. So there you go.
I have a few more keys. I just realized we didn't do trivia. We're all out of order here. This is a special edition, folks. Remember, it's a redux.
That's right.
I didn't even
do
a
redux.
If I remember right, I don't think I even did a synopsis when we started. I think we just kind of went headlong in.
Yeah, we're doing The Exorcist.
Yeah. I mean, most people know what this movie's about. I have that Friedkin was inspired by many artists, including Rembrandt and Johannes Vermeer, for shots in this film. I'm not that big of an art enthusiast, so I couldn't really tell you what those paintings are.
Right. Well, I remember there was one in particular where Ellen Burstyn was talking about that he was inspired by a Vermeer and said, I wanted this scene to look like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want breath to come out in smoke, but no.
Yes.
And then I already mentioned Columbo. Columbo is another key because Kinderman went on to inspire that character. And that's all the keys I have. I do have trivia that we could skim through, but I have a lot of it.
You skim it, baby. Like I said, this has been 50 years. There's a lot of documentaries on this movie. There's a lot of stuff about the behind the scenes, little stuff that happened. A lot of it we've covered. But yeah, if you see anything new, you jump it out there.
Oh, here's a note I have that's kind of funny. Doctors smoking? All the doctors in the hospital were smoking in the hospital or in the doctor's examination room, which I was like, that's crazy. And then I also noticed that all that equipment looked really old, like it was rusted and shit, like the doctor's equipment. Did you notice that?
Hey, that's the way it was in the 70s. We didn't want to buy new stuff yet.
No,
plastics
equipment
hadn't taken over everything.
Smoke.
Yeah.
Craziness.
I did read that somewhere recently, though, the fact that in the 70s and early 80s, plastics had not entered the industry as much. Everything was still steel and metal and aluminum and all of that.
Heavy
and
clunky.
See rusty, clunky, loud, stuff.
Okay, I already mentioned the Peter Masterson. And you already mentioned, see, some of this we've already talked about just in general. One, you mentioned Jason Miller getting pissed off about the gunshot. I had that as well.
Oh, yeah.
And that, here's a good one. The original teaser trailer consisted of nothing but images of the white-faced demon flickering quickly, flashing in and out of the darkness, and was banned in many theaters and deemed as too frightening.
Yeah. Have you seen it?
I think I watched it when we covered this the first time. I think I went back and found it on YouTube.
Yeah, you can find it online. It is creepy. It is a really creepy trailer.
And that's something that we didn't talk about. And that is, what do you think was his reasonings in the subliminal stuff where they flash that face sometimes? Like when I think you see it when Damien's mother is coming up the subway steps, don't they flash it there?
And you see it once in the house behind whoever the gardener guy is, Hans or whatever his name is. You see it in the kitchen.
Carl.
It flashes. Carl. Yeah.
Yeah. Carl plays more prominently in the book. His daughter is like a drug addict, and Regan talks to him about it. Your daughter's on drugs or whatever. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because demons know these things.
Obviously, the demon knew about Karis's mother. Yeah.
And
so anyway,
going to die up there.
I don't think we mentioned it though. That was an original makeup test. I don't know if Dick Smith did it or not, but it was a makeup test before because they did several makeup tests for Reagan's makeup.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They did, and you can find those again online. They have images of them.
Some of them look stupid.
He first went with a really wild witch look. He was kind of his inspiration was a witch. And the only thing good from it, he said in the Smith interview, he said that the only good thing out of it was he realized he could change this very cherubic, angelic face of hers with the candy apple cheeks and the little pug nose. He could alter her face enough to start to get scary.
Yeah.
And then they went into all this demonic sort of makeup. But he said it was Friedkin who actually came to him and said, what if instead the horror looks self-imposed? So what if her face looks like she has scratched herself and hurt herself? And that's where the cuts and the makeup comes from.
Okay.
And that's what led to the final design, which does look awfully horrific.
Right.
And like she could have easily scratched her own eyes out.
Yeah.
She's
back to awards. Director George Cukor loudly blasted the film and threatened to resign from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Scientists if it won for Best Picture. The Academy Awards given to the film were for screenplay and sound. So that I did not have those. You had them. So I think that's weird. If I'm not mistaken, George Cukor was either gay or closeted. That's why he's on my radar. But he used to throw big dinner parties. He was known for throwing dinner parties.
Gone with the Wind?
If he was one, he was one of three because that picture was cursed as far as directors.
His number one IMDb credit is
like Betty Davis, maybe.
No, My Fair Lady.
Okay. I seem to remember that he was gay. Not that it has anything to do with it, but why would he blast a film? I mean, that's stupid. I guess maybe it scared him, or maybe he thought it was beneath them because it was horror.
I would pretty much guarantee that. Yeah, he was one of the directors of Gone with the Wind, one of the directors of Wizard of Oz, Philadelphia Story.
So he was a classic film director.
Classic film director with a lot of big movie stars sort of things. And I'm sure he probably saw, if it wasn't afraid of it, he saw this as a B movie.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I don't think he saw it as being scary. I think he saw it as a B movie because horror was not respected. Yeah.
You can't lower the standards of the Academy to actually recognize a horror movie can't be the best.
Yeah. He needs to move on.
Yeah.
I think he already has.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure he has.
pretty sure he shuffled off this mortal coil.
Okay, we also mentioned the original exorcism that the movie was based on. I have a brief synopsis of that. It was 1949, performed in Cottage City, Maryland, and later in St. Louis, Missouri, because they moved. A newspaper reported on a speech a minister gave to an amateur parapsychology society in which he claimed to have exorcised a demon from a 13-year-old boy named Robbie, and that the ordeal lasted a little more than 6 weeks. Robbie was born in June of 1935 and resided in Cottage City, Maryland, was a member of St. James Parish. He entered the 7th grade of Bladensburg Junior High the fall of 1947 and was removed in the middle of his 8th grade year on January 15th, 1949. He had experiences that ended in April of 1949. He re-enrolled in the 8th grade at, why do I have all this?
I don't know.
Anyway, from what I understand, I think he might have been possessed more than 6 weeks because it started in Maryland and ended in St. Louis. I do remember that.
Right.
And then I mentioned there's a serial killer, huh?
And Friedkin, not Blatty, but Friedkin got the original diaries and reports from the case.
That's cool.
I read that online too. Yes.
I mentioned that there was an actual serial killer in The Exorcist, Paul Bateson. He was an X-ray technician by profession, and he is one of the radiologists present during the carotid angiography scene. Carotid, angiography scene. Several years later, he was convicted of murdering film critic Addison Verrill. Bateson became the prime suspect in what were known as the Bag Murders, carried out from 1977 to 1978, in which 6 male victims were mutilated and dismembered, their remains wrapped in black plastic bags and dumped in the Hudson River. Some of the grisly fragments washed up on the New Jersey shore, others coming to ground near the World Trade Center. These murders were the inspiration for Friedkin's later film, Cruising.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's a key.
That's really a key, almost. Within itself, it's a key to. Actually, it's not a key to The Exorcist, really. But
it's because of the curse, Tim. It's because of the curse. The curse led that guy to do it.
Oh my God! It was originally intended to be remade in 2015, but was canceled, and I think that's because Gordon Green moved on to did the Halloween movies instead, and now
Jamie called him up and said, "I want to do mine first."
Yeah, I got snubbed for this because that damn Linda Blair got it. Let's do mine first.
Right, do mine first.
This is really stupid and trivial. During the scene where Karis is visiting Chris as she's ironing, it has the famous ivory snow box featuring porn star Marilyn Chambers on it.
Well, there's some trivia for you.
That's some deep dive trivia. You mentioned Billy Graham claimed the celluloid was actually possessed.
Yes, he did.
I hate to read this. This is really long, but I want to because I found this fascinating. William Peter Blatty became friends with actress Tippi Hedren in the early 70s, and she named one of her lions, Billy, after him. Tippi Hedren's known for having rescued lions and stuff.
Oh, yeah. I've been to her compound.
Oh, you have? Okay. Mm-hmm. He gave her a copy of his unpublished novel, The Exorcist, and she was so absorbed reading it that she woke up her then husband, Agent Noel Marshall, in the middle of the night and told him that he should represent Blatty in publishing the novel and the film adaptation. She took the photo of the author for the first additional novel's back jacket. So she's a photographer of the back jacket.
Yep.
The 1971 novel became a bestseller, and Marshall would be credited as executive producer for the film adaptation, also titled The Exorcist, where he was supposed to receive 15% of the profits. When the film became a blockbuster, Blatty refused to give the profits since he never signed a written contract. but only initiated it. Marshall
Wow.
sued, and the lawsuit dragged on for several years, eventually reaching an out-of-court settlement. These were trying years for Tippi Hedren and Marshall, since they needed the money to feed the big cats for their film Roar. The financial success would result in their divorce. Many years later, Blatty ran into Tippi Hedren at a party and said hi. She walked away from him without even acknowledging it.
Wow.
Isn't that fascinating? That's old school
curse.
Hollywood shit, man.
Because of the curse, right there.
It's not a curse. That's just fucking greed.
Yeah, greed. Yeah. Old school greed.
Yeah. But Tippi Hedren, is old school Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
In an interview.
Where we lived in Palmdale when we were in California, I used to drive by her compound every day.
Oh, okay. How cool.
Right off the highway. Yeah.
This is where remember I said I had Bernard Herrmann down? Okay, this is why. In an interview, Exorcist director William Friedkin revealed how he originally hired famed film composer Bernard Herrmann, who composed the brilliant scores to Psycho and Citizen Kane. To his extreme shock, Bernard Herrmann said yes, but the meeting did not go well. The article describes the meeting and the outcome. Friedkin's horror film, The Exorcist, has been scaring the pants off moviegoers as well as making movie viewers nauseous since its 1973 release. Even with all its terrifying and stomach-churning imagery, the picture wouldn't have been nearly as intense if it weren't for all the hair-raising soundtrack. It's surprising then that director Friedkin hadn't intended to use the music that ended up as the score for The Exorcist. Friedkin had first turned to Bernard Herrmann, perhaps the great composer that we mentioned. A lot of this is repeating. Sorry about that. To Friedkin's delight, Herrmann was interested. When Herrmann came out of the screening room, he said, "I might be able to help you out with this piece of shit, but you'll have to leave it with me, and I'll see if I can come up with something."
Oh, that didn't go well.
No, not at all. Herrmann went on to relentlessly criticize the movie and in various ways, and name the various ways he could have saved it. For example, he called the desert scene at the beginning a piece of shit and said it would have to be edited out, or it would not, or he would not score the movie. The conversation left Friedkin understandably very offended, and he ended up firing the composer as a result of this. So he was on this movie, and then they didn't use music at all. They used just tubular bells in certain sections. Yeah. Sorry. I don't know why that was all jumbled, but
that's really interesting though. I never heard that story. So that was good trivia, but yeah.
Someone else blasted the movie. Do you want to know who?
Gene Siskel.
No. Peter Cushing.
Really?
Yeah, I know. That's what I said.
Why
he
would
blasted
he not
the
like
Exorcist.
A demon movie?
Well, he was old school horror. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't into all the new stuff. He called it blasphemous and was quoted as, "I wouldn't go see The Exorcist any more than I would go see a Blue movie." He was further quoted saying he wouldn't go anywhere to see it because he didn't like profanity. And of course, his movies didn't have that.
Of course.
They were Hammer movies. It's explicit, blasphemous. He also said Christopher Lee, his co-star in many films, warned him not to see it. So Christopher Lee knew Peter Cushing and said, "You don't need to see this."
Yeah, don't go see this one, buddy.
He said the film would enrage him. And he said he just didn't want to be a part of it. I'm not going to read any more of that.
So I gather from that Cushing must have been very religious.
I'm thinking that too.
Yeah.
And that, the type
if his
of horror
comment was
movies
blasphemous, not too scary or not too graphic or not whatever. If your thing was, it was blasphemous, then that's a totally different thing.
I had to mention it because of his connections in the horror industry. I just thought.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
All right. That is all I have. What do you have? Anything else?
That is it. I'm spent. I'm done. I need to.
You've been exercised.
I need to be blessed. We want to thank you guys for our first Redux. We are going to do this 3 more times this year. We're going to take episodes from the past that we need to redo in a visual form and re-examine them again and maybe get some new insights into it from previously and what we've done. And we're also going to do some Reader's Choice this year too. So it's going to be a good year of some redoing stuff.
Reader's Choice?
Or listener's choice, watcher's choice. What would you call
I would
it?
say listener's choice makes more sense.
Listeners,
or actually, yeah, viewer's choice. You said reader. It could be listener or viewer, but not reader.
It could not be reader. I'm totally incorrect in that. Tim corrects me well.
We
would love. That's what we think of one of the scariest movies in history, and we would love to know what you guys think. If you would let us know in comments down below, like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all those kind of things. If you are if you're new to us and are enjoying this, we also have Patreon. So it's a way to support the podcast and YouTube channel, and also a way to get some extra bonus material just for you. Tim, are we still scary next week too?
It's Halloween month. It's October. What do you expect?
Okay, all right.
It is sci-fi though.
It is, but scary. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not that scary, but it's what I could find out of your selection.
Okay. All right.
It's as scary as I could get.
I'm going to go get my crucifix and do some prayers and hopefully avoid a curse.
I think I'm going to go have some green pea soup for lunch, maybe a sandwich.
Yeah.
Talk
to you then.
Shit. Bye.
Bye.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.